Hi everyone! Welcome to all fans of INKtoberfest and Maker Forte. My name is Maureen. I also go by Crafty, and I am here today to celebrate with you INKtoberfest, which is a fun way to look at the supplies and how to use them from Maker Forte. So as you can see, I've already started to assemble my supplies. And I'm going to give you a list of the supplies you'll need to make this angel project that we are doing. We are going to be using the fabulous You're an Angel stamps for this cute little project. But along with that, we have also been choosing the Chameleon Sparkle Specialty Cardstock by Maker Forte. This paper is fantastic. I will also be using a little bit of the premium vellum paper and the Eclipse Black Maker Forte embossing powder too. So I am going to start this project with a card base. It is cut at a 4.25 by 5.5, just basic card base. And I'm going to cut the same size piece of paper in the Chameleon Sparkle paper. Now this sparkle paper is amazing because in its silver form, it's gorgeous. It does not fall apart on your fingers, so when you walk away, you do not have glitter dust all over. And what's going to be fun about this project is I'm going to show you the different ways you can possibly color this paper to suit your needs. So I have cut this once again at a 4.25 by 5.5 sheet of paper, just double checking to make sure that it covers my entire card base. Now, I am a big fan of trying to conserve space on having die cuts whenever possible. So I'm going to actually create my own starburst pattern without a die cut. All you need is a small little circle shape. Now I'm just taking a regular die cut I have in my stash, and I'm going to trace on the back of the Chameleon Sparkle paper a small circle. This will become the centerpiece for my starburst shape. And I am going to show you how you can cut this pattern all by yourself without any need for a special die cut. So as you keep the piece of paper flipped over, just take a regular scissors and just pick a starting point for your cuts. You're just going to be cutting at an angle from outside in towards the circle and stopping your line at the circle when you get there. Do this every about half inch to quarter inch, depending on how many starbursts you want to have, and make your way all the way around the circle. Okay. Now I'm using a nice sharp scissors for this. You can also use a detail scissors as well, but I am just taking a straight line, not needing to worry about whether I've got any curves or anything. If you're worried about making a straight line cut, you can also use like a paper trimmer or a cutter too. Okay, just make sure that you are stopping pretty cleanly at the circle, because you'll see in a minute how we end up making this starburst pattern. So once again, I'm cutting my lines just about every half inch or quarter inch. You'll see what happens here when I get to the bottom, because your cuts may be uneven. And so in just a moment, you'll see what we do to fix that. At the bottom, you can make like a diamond shape, if you will, when you cut, just like I did there, just so you have like a quadrant that actually hits the corner. Okay, and now I have gotten to the point where I think to myself, okay, I've got the starburst cut, and I'm going to need to pull every other piece out. And what I'm going to need to do then is switch to like a small detail scissors. This will allow you to get into the circle and make a nice clean curvature cut. Don't throw these pieces away though, because we're going to need them. We're actually going to use them in just a moment. So just cut them out about every other starburst shape and set them aside. And you can just use that using any sort of clean paper trimmer that you have. Go nice and slow. That's why you have the pencil to help you. Pencil markings to help you. So as I'm cutting this, let me just describe the Chameleon Sparkle paper. I was really pleasantly surprised when I opened this because it is literally a no shed paper. I love the feel of this. Not one sparkle has shown up on my fingers or on my outfit, any of this at times that I was working with this paper. So I am a huge fan, and I will probably be ordering a few more packs for myself. The other fun part, and this is what we're going to see in a moment, is that you can color this paper with practically any format you like. I'm going to be showing a technique to color both it with ink and also with Copic markers. Okay, now we've gotten to the bottom where we're a little uneven. See how I did that? So what I'm going to do is just come back in and make another small starburst cut and take that trim out so that I am even with an every other cut. So if that happens, just pick your biggest piece and trim it down a little bit. And there we go. We are all trimmed. Now this should still fit your 4.25 by 5.5 card base on the front. And then set aside your pieces because we'll be coloring those in just a moment. Okay. So pretty in the light. What a pretty shimmer this has. All right, I am going to take my negative pieces now that I have cut out from my shape. I'm going to set aside the starburst shape because I will adhere that in a moment. And you can choose what ink you would like to use. Now, for purposes of the color that I wanted, I am choosing the Distress Oxide in a tumbled glass color. I wanted this light blue color, and this is the one that I happen to have at home. But I will caution you about this ink, just to be very fair. So the Distress Oxide ink is a slow drying ink. So as you sponge it on your pieces, you need to know that this will be all over your fingers if you do not make sure it takes the time to dry. I love the color, I wanted to use it, and that's why I chose it, but I also need to warn you that this ink can get all over the place. So I am taking a sponge applicator, and I am just sponging some of the ink onto the silver. And the amazing part about this paper is that when I lift my sponge, there is no sparkle anywhere. It does not come off. It is truly one of the coolest papers I've seen. So I'm sponging this on with my sponge. And again, keep in mind that once you get your fingers in there, you could potentially have ink all over. What I'm going to do later to ensure that this dries is I'm going to actually use an embossing tool to make sure the ink dries nice and thoroughly on each piece, just because I wanted to use this blue color. You can, however, use any of the other Maker Forte inks that are more fast drying, and they will have the exact same effect. It is a really pretty color, but I want you to be aware that it is going to take some time to dry. Okay, so I've belabored that point, but let's go ahead and color the other pieces. And while I'm doing so, let's talk about the other ways that the other inks and things that you can color with. So a lot of the Maker Forte inks are dye-based versus pigment-based ink. So choosing one or the other really depends on how much time you want to put forth in allowing for drying. If you're using a faster pigment-based ink, they will dry almost immediately. And if you're using something like this and you're still finding that it's rubbing off, another suggestion I have for you is to buy a sealer. And I actually did go back over my card when I was done and apply a light sealer to the top to make sure my ink wouldn't come off. Okay. Now you'll also notice that I am sponging the ink on only about 3/4 of the way up. This is because when I assemble the card later, I am going to have a scallop shape covering it, and so there's no need for me to actually put the ink all over it and spend that extra muscle time to rub in all of the ink. My sponge applicator is just one from a local craft store, by the way, but some of the tools that Maker Forte has for you to use include sponges and things like that, so certainly take a look. If you need something that is a little less labor intensive, something with a handle, for example. Okay. So we'll just get these all covered. Notice I'm also using a background piece of paper to cover the excess as well, so that it doesn't get everywhere on my work surface. That's a great way to handle that too. Now, I feel like there are so many fabulous colors out there. You could probably do this particular starburst theme in so many different color shades. I was picturing this would be pretty with a yellow, and then you'd have more of a gold and silver look, or possibly even a Christmas card, because this stamp set includes sayings for Christmas. So you could do a green or a green and red, a green and pink, and so forth, and it would look, I think, fabulous, to be honest. Okay, so I think I've just about got coverage on most all my pieces. Again, I'm going to let these dry. If you have an embossing tool at home, a wet embossing dryer tool, that will speed up the process of the drying for the Distress Oxide ink as well. I also encourage you to try things like a liquid ink as well and drop a few drops on there and see how it goes. The possibilities really are endless. Okay, I'm going to grab my dried pieces now, and this is going to be with a tweezers tool so that I can effectively dry this without burning my fingers. And we're just going to run the embossing tool over it. Try not to do this too long so you don't bend the paper, just enough to get a little bit of drying time going on. And then we'll start assembling our card next. Okay, now making sure your fingers are clean, go ahead and grab your card base, and let's grab that silver Chameleon sparkle starburst that we cut out originally and apply some adhesive to the back. Now, in this case, I am working with a wet glue. I find that for this to line it up properly on the front of the card base, a wet glue is going to be more forgiving. You can use a roller tape if you'd prefer, but I am not confident enough I'm going to get it in the right spot the first time. So I'm going to go ahead and use a wet glue and just cover all the edges, including the corners, so you don't want your corners to come up. If for any reason I have cut this funny, I can also go back with a trimming scissors and just make sure that I've got the edges right. Okay. So now we're going to apply the starburst. I'm going to line it up to the top left corner first and just lay that down. Now, doesn't it look like either a star coming out of the page or even possibly a peppermint? That's why I think some of the color choices you could make here would be fabulous. Okay, good news. I have lined up my paper properly. So now it's time to apply my starburst pieces back in. This is why you wanted to be very careful when you cut these pieces out. I'm going to also apply these with a wet glue so that I can get it in there just the way I want it. And I am using a tweezers just to make sure I don't have any residue while this is drying. So I'm applying my pieces one by one, making sure they fit just like a puzzle piece back into my starburst. And again, if for any reason you have a corner edge sticking out, you can always take just a trimming scissors and trim the edges. So this is going to look super pretty in the light. And this actually is just going to become just a standard greeting card. Let's talk about the stamp set for a minute while I apply some of these pieces. The You're an Angel set has really cute sayings for thank you cards, for Christmas cards, and just for general all-around encouragement. The angels that are on this set are absolutely adorable to choose from, and I really had a hard time picking the one that I wanted. All right, I am still applying, and you'll notice that I got a little glue on the paper. The good news is the Chameleon sparkle paper cleans up real nicely too. So I took an actual wet wipe and just wiped up some of the extra glue. All right, keep paper piecing, keep applying. What's really cool is you could trim this down even further and leave a little white showing on the edges. Or you could actually trim them down twice and do two colors if you wanted. All right, almost done here, getting all my pieces. Some of the work that I did here was just to make sure that my pieces all fit in the spot I wanted them to go. All right, and then for my last piece. And now I've got little starburst action going on, and my scalloped shape is going to fit in the middle just fine. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to set that aside, let it all dry. And in the meantime, now I'm going to be working with the You're an Angel stamp set. Okay. I have also the Maker Forte Eclipse Black embossing powder, and I'm using this to emboss the angel so that she sticks out and has sort of a raised effect when I'm done. To prepare my circle, I do like to use an anti-static tool. If you don't have one at home, you can just use a dryer sheet, but anything where you want to keep the embossing powder from sticking to your page. And then I'm choosing the little angel with the ponytail buns. She's adorable. I decided to pick, there are several halos you can pick from as well. I just decided to pick the standard halo for her today. And now I'm also using another distress ink, which is an embossing ink by Tim Holtz. This is also available on the Maker Forte site as well. And getting my stamp really, really wet. Try to keep your fingers off of the surface. You'll notice that I actually made that mistake there and put my fingers on the surface. Once I've hit the anti-static tool to my surface, I don't want to touch it with my fingers and get the oils on there again. So I will learn that lesson going forward. You'll see in a moment that I'll have to brush some of that off. Okay, and now if you've never worked with embossing powder before, having a sheet of paper underneath your work surface is essential for you to get this powder to come back, right? So you're going to dump a good liberal amount onto your stamp shape. It is going to pick up the wet surface from the powder. And I'm using my tweezers tool so I get my fingers on there as little as possible and lightly tapping the embossing powder dust off so that I've got good coverage, okay? Now, if it didn't work or you didn't get it on there, you can actually put some more powder on and tap more off later on. So you can reapply, just like I'm doing here, to make sure that all the spaces are sticking. Okay. All right, we're going to do a little more tapping here. And then, as I mentioned, because I had put my fingers on this, I do have some brushing that I need to do. So what I recommend is actually just using just a paintbrush to get in there in those little crevices where you might have some extra like embossing powder sticking to your surface. If you have that at all, especially a brush that's cut at an angle like this, really helpful for those types of things. Fortunately, I didn't have too much, but this is a great tool to sort of trace your outline if you need. And the Eclipse black powder is popping really, really well on this, and so I love it. Okay. So now I need to get all that powder back into my jar. So just a trick of the trade if you've never embossed before, that powder can actually now be poured back or funneled back into your jar to use for later. So I love this because that way I don't feel bad about having to use a bunch or use a plastic container that it gets stuck in or anything. I just use a scrap piece of paper and I pour the majority back in. All right, I have now brushed down my surface to make sure all the powder is done, and I'm still using my tweezers, a really good tool to have around your craft room. And now I'm going to be getting my embossing gun out. And this again is a heat embossing tool that will actually heat up the powder on your stamp and turn it into a permanent gel form, if you will. I like to start with most embossing by embossing from the back. If I do that, then that will actually start to melt the bottom first and then follow up by melting the top. I flip it every so often because the more you apply heat to your paper, the more your paper will curl. So you want to keep moving it back and forth just until the embossing powder melts. And what you're going to come and find is a raised bumpy surface that looks really, really great in the light. Okay, she's cute. She's all ready to go, and she's set aside waiting to be applied to my card. So now what I'm going to do is turn her over, and we're going to add a couple of pop dots to the back just to give this a raised appearance. I'm sort of envisioning she's maybe sitting on a cloud, encouraging whoever the recipient is of this card. All right, and then we're going to take the stickers off the back. Another fabulous thing about the Chameleon sparkle paper is that these sticker pop dots stick really nicely to this. Sometimes I've found that they tend to slip off because they don't have any grip, but this paper, like I said, I'm a huge fan, and so I hope you'll enjoy working with it as well. All right, well, we've stuck her down in the middle of our starburst, but we're not quite done. We need to add some more effective elements here. And so I love some of the sayings from the You're an Angel set. I am actually not going to emboss this time. I'm just going to use a plain black ink. And I'm also going to punch out a couple clouds. I've punched out one cloud in a white cardstock, and I am now using the premium Vellum translucent paper from Maker Forte. And I'm going to make these look like clouds. Once again, working with the Distress ink in blue, and I am dusting with my sponge the edges of my clouds. And this kind of gives a dimensional look, 3D appearance. And the vellum paper takes this ink so very nicely. There's minimal drying time. Set those aside, let them sit for a few minutes just to make sure the ink is set, and then we're ready to apply it to the card. Okay, now, when you are adhering vellum paper, it gets tricky sometimes depending on the adhesive you choose. Notice that I was using wet glue earlier, but wet glue does not work really well with vellum. And so my suggestion to you would be to invest in a good rolling tape for those times when you need it to be invisible. So a rolling tape underneath vellum is going to be perfect to stick down, and it will not be seen from behind. And a lot of people are challenged with, how do I use vellum and how do I stick it to my card? Well, that is the trick. One of the tricks of the trade is just using an invisible rolling tape. Other suggestions people make if you need to use a pop dot sometimes is to put a sentiment over it or something to hide it like a gem, and people will do that as well. All right, I want some 3D action going on, so I'm going to put one of the clouds up on top of my card and one underneath my scallop circle. And then I'm going to take my Urine Angel sentiment on my cloud, and I think I will raise that one up as well. So I'm going to use some more pop dots and stick these on, and then it sort of looks like this little angel's flying in the clouds. And we'll stick it down here, right out of the way, filling in that white space. Okay, we are almost done, but I did promise that I was going to show one other way that you can color. If you don't like working with the wet Distress ink and you would prefer to use something like a Copic marker, I am in awe of the fact that this paper takes a Copic marker so well. So if you would prefer to color the starbursts with a marker, feel free to try that out. I am actually using a Copic marker for the stars that I cut out in the Chameleon sparkle paper just to show you how well they hold their color. And then you don't have to worry about any drying time. You can use that instead. And now I've applied those to my card, and she's a cutie. She's waiting to be mailed. I really appreciate you joining me today. Thanks so much, and happy INKtoberfest to you all. I hope you will see me again next time on the next edition of INKtoberfest.